We'll go ahead and get started a little bit after our 6 o'clock scheduled start. Thank you all so much for joining us here this evening. This is Committee of the Whole, and we have one item on our agenda this evening that's proposed ordinance 27-18, which will appear on Council's docket later this evening at our General Council meeting. Basically, tonight we have a number of folks here with us to kick off Council's consideration of this term sheet that's before us here for our consideration this evening. Those include Mr. George Papandreas from Carnegie, also Mr. Rustam Corey III, also from Carnegie. We have Robin Minter-Smyers, our attorney from Thompson Hine, and Planning and Development Director Bryce Sylvester. Also looking out to the audience, I do see at least one person who was on our citizen panel who was involved in interviewing the prospective developers and other community members as well. We obviously appreciate you joining us this evening for this discussion. Since Director Sylvester probably has his own introduction to give to this topic, I will turn it over to Director Sylvester to kick us off. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. President, and members of Council for scheduling tonight's meeting. Again, Bryce Sylvester, Director of Planning and Development. I am going to walk us through an introductory presentation to the One Lakewood Place development, which kicks off where we currently are in the process, which is that the City Administration and the Carnegie team have agreed to a term sheet, and we are recommending that term sheet to your body for review and approval. So tonight I'm going to work through broad strokes of the term sheet. We'll talk through some specific details tonight, and then we're going to set up a few weeks in a row of review on Monday evenings. So again, the project One Lakewood Place is a mixed-use project at the corner of Belle and Detroit on the former hospital site. The image up on the screen is one that many of you have seen a bunch. This is the view if you were looking from probably the 7th floor of Lakewood Center North, looking down on the project. You'll see the community gathering space holding the corner at Belle and Detroit, the Curtis block being preserved with an adaptive reuse on the corner of Marlow and Detroit. You'll see a commercial building with mixed-use retail and office that comes out towards the middle of the site with a parking garage behind it and residential that would be parked behind that. So tonight I first wanted to lay up what the proposed council meeting schedule is. Tonight, April 16th, as I said, we'll be reviewing the deliverables and shared vision articulated in the term sheet. April 23rd, which is next Monday, we're going to focus on financing and return on investment, which are two topics that have come up a bunch over the last few weeks in particular. April 30th, we're going to be a little more fluid and set that up based on question and answer that have come up over the last 2 weeks. May 7th, the same thing, based on question and answer from City Council and also members of the community. We will structure that meeting based on those questions and answers. And then I wanted to daylight one upcoming opportunity, which is on May 20th, the ICSC Global Real Estate Convention, which our partners at Carnegie can speak to in much greater detail, is occurring in Las Vegas. That's an opportunity for developers to pitch projects to tenants, to businesses that are interested in locating in interesting projects. Certainly at these conventions, there is a buzz around coming back to the urban core, and so having a term sheet executed by that date gives this project and our development partners a lot more substance in those conversations. So again, tonight we're going to do a broad overview, but I wanted to put up 6 bullet points on some specifics that we'll talk about. First is a question we've gotten on why mixed-use projects? Why are we doing a mixed-use project here? What are the development minimums established in the term sheet? How is the community gathering space structured? Community engagement and how that's addressed in the term sheet. And also the introduction of public investment, which again we will spend next week's meeting talking about in greater detail. The process is something that we've come back to time and time again. www.onelakewood.com/downtown development documents this entire process in a catalog format dating back to February of 2017. February 2017, we gave a presentation in this room daylighting the entire project, and then we're pretty disciplined at providing community updates via that page, with the idea being that at any point you could go to that website, figure out where we've been, where we are, and also where we're going. On that page, there's resources documents and also a community engagement section. In addition to what's on that website today, we will be posting a One Lakewood Place frequently asked questions document. The mayor passed that document out to council members this evening. That document is a culmination of questions that we've received up to this point from council members, from members of our administration, from members of the public, really throughout the last 14 months. And so that document's also meant to be just a landing place. If you've had a question about the development project, that could be a convenient place to find an answer to a question. So tonight, and what is in front of you, is the term sheet. The term sheet explains the business terms and structure of the project, the roles and responsibilities of the parties, and the minimum requirements for each party to deliver. It is a very important document in that it sets the structure for what's next, which is the development agreement. So the big business terms are outlined in this document. The two big inputs for the term sheet are Carnegie's Round 2 proposal, as well as the city's development objectives, of which I know you guys probably have a hard time reading this. I apologize for putting in such small font, but I promised you I would continue to come back to these 13 development objectives, and we will continue to do so because they all make sense as a part of what's in front of you tonight. So I'm going to briefly read through some of them. A transformative mixed-use development, visionary architecture engaging and complementing the character and quality of Lakewood's building stock, a project that activates the streetscape, something that highlights multiple modes of transportation, has a multifunctional outdoor community gathering space, responds to shifting market conditions, identifies the historical significance of the site, supports environmentally sustainable development best practices, has sensitivity to the adjacent single-family neighborhood, is treated as a catalytic economic development project, attracts diverse businesses, complements available community housing options, and last but certainly not least, has tangible returns on public investments. You will see these 13 development objectives weave through the term sheet and also a lot of the things that I'll talk about tonight. These development objectives came from the August 2015 public meeting that we conducted at the University of Akron-Lakewood to help frame how we were going to go out for the RFQ and the RFP. So a question that we've gotten a few times is why the land is mixed use? Why is the city pursuing a project like that? I would say a couple of things. First, projects like this promote and enhance neighborhood vibrancy and economic vitality. They diversify marketplace risk so that you're not eating up all of your risk in one use. And it also provides ample opportunities for people to engage with the project. So for example, if you're not an office worker, but you're looking for a place to live, you can seek out One Lakewood Place. If you are looking for an urban community gathering space in our downtown district, which doesn't exist at this scale today, this is could be a place for you. If you're looking for a place to shop for new retail that's currently not available in the city, this could be a place for you. In addition to that, cities like ours are leveraging mixed-use developments just like this. And you can see it in Cuyahoga County and in our region. A few examples would be in Shaker Heights, there's the Van Aken development, which is currently under construction and actually mimics this project in scale. A second is the Top of the Hill site in Cleveland Heights, which is also a mixed-use project. Slightly in front of us on the process side, that project will likely break ground in the next couple of years. And then even in the city of Cleveland at the corner of West 25th and Detroit, the Snaveleys are developing a mixed-use project in Ohio City. So we have three very local examples of areas of our community that are also building out just like this. And I think that it is an additional sign that these projects make sense in our cities. So the five main components that ensure this project is going to be a mixed-use site include 100,000 square feet of combined office and retail, 140 residential units, on-site structured parking, the adaptive reuse and preservation of the Curtis Block, and lastly, the outdoor community gathering space. In that first component, the commercial office and retail space, one piece that we're very excited about is the Class A component. Lakewood does not have this product available in its city right now. So an anecdote would be if there's a business that's looking for this type of space, we can't compete. We don't even have an opportunity to try to locate a business that's specifically looking for Class A office space in an urban center. We do have some office space that's available in our community, but it does not meet the standards that some companies and businesses are looking for. So this is going to help us with attraction. It's also going to help us with retention. There are communities, there are businesses in our city that are looking for this style of space, and we don't have it today. It's not meant to scare anybody, it's just the reality. We can't compete if we don't build space like this. And so for us, this is a really critical part of what's in front of you. The second is the residential piece, 140 units minimum. And I pulled up just a short line on a Lakewood's community vision, which is to continue to support a variety of housing options that meet the needs of Lakewood's diverse community. One thing that our partners at Carnegie keep coming back to is let the marketplace tell us what that residential piece needs to be. There is a minimum deliverable here of 140 units, but we're going to let the marketplace tell us what would be most successful on the residential side on this site. And I think our community vision is also guiding us to do that. This will not have housing for everybody, but it's not meant to. It's only meant to complement what is already in our city. And I think that this term sheet and this project does just that. Another critical, non-sexy part of the project is parking. And a lot of people, you like that? Okay. I don't think it's that. But the parking component is critical for all of the tenants, all of the residents that are going to be using this space. The structured parking deck is going to help with Marlowe and Belle neighborhood to also not have to take on that additional parking or traffic. So we're not going to have that big of a concern with retail customers or residents using Marlowe and Belle primarily for parking. And so that's a critical part here. The other part that's in your term sheet is that Carnegie is welcoming in the entire downtown district into this parking garage. So an opportunity for somebody that wants to visit One Lakewood Place but go shop at Geiger's or go get a Chipotle burrito or go hang out at the Root. Come park in this parking garage and enjoy the entire downtown district. That part is mentioned and prioritized in the term sheet. I touched on the Curtis Block a little bit earlier, but this is a critical part of the project. It is one of the two main commercial corners. The Curtis Block is on the Marlowe and Detroit side. And the Carnegie team has committed to preserving and making an adaptive reuse of this building. It is going to anchor one of the corners of this site. And I truly think it's going to really welcome people in as you turn the corner heading down the sidewalk on Detroit and going into the community space. The Curtis Block is going to be a big part of how you experience that in this project. So as I mentioned, you see the Curtis Block at the corner of Marlowe and Belle and the community gathering space at the corner of Belle and Detroit. This project is estimated to have hard construction costs of $72 million. Inside of that, we are estimating conservatively $1.5 million in annual combined real estate and income taxes. To be very clear, Cuyahoga County sets real estate taxes in our community. They're not going to estimate what the deliverable is going to be on this site until it is built. They will use a lot of factors to determine that value, including the revenue generated on site, the types of tenants that are there, and they'll work with the developer to do that. We have used a formula that is recognized by project management consultants as a method to determine what we think the estimate is, and we are being conservative with that estimate. The breakdown between real estate taxes and income taxes is about $1.2 million in real estate taxes and about $300,000 conservatively in new income taxes. That's represented through the office space, retail space, and the new residential units. That's where the sources of income tax come from on this project. This is a close-up of the currently proposed community gathering space. And if you talk to George and Rustam and the team at Carnegie, this is really just a beginning. The team wanted to put out an idea of a space in order to engage our community. And so this is just really that first step in what this space might be. As it's currently structured, Carnegie will fund the construction, the maintenance, and will also manage the programming to make sure that this remains a first-class community gathering space for the long term. It's an important distinction because we think the long-term benefit of private ownership is consistent programming and maintenance for the long term. We want this space to be active at all times, and we think that the Carnegie team is best equipped to execute that. And so that's why it's structured like, one of the reasons why it's structured like that in the term sheet. Also in the term sheet, you'll see that the city will have access to the space for community and special events. And again, trying to seek out achieving the goal of a vibrant gathering space capable of engaging the entire community in many ways. So in order to use our imaginations a little bit, we wanted to put this up here. So after the term sheet's executed, we plan on engaging the community on what that community space might be. And so it's opportunities like this that maybe help us to think bigger about this space. What could it be? Could it be a splash pad? Could we do yoga in the community gathering space? Can we do the farmer's market? There are a lot of options that we can consider based on the structure that we've put in front of you. And we love this picture up on the screen too. It's just adorable. Another part of the term sheet that we worked very hard with our partners on is specifically calling out and prioritizing the importance of community engagement, the architectural board of review, and the planning commission process, and how integral they are to the project's success. In Lakewood, as you guys know, our community helps to make our projects better. And so that would be the next step that we were working towards. After the term sheet's executed, the rezoning process would kick off, which would open the project up to a lot of community engagement to talk about programming, materials, landscaping, many other things. But this point is specifically called out in the term sheet that's in front of you, and we think that that holds a lot of weight. Also specifically called out in the term sheet is an integration with the surrounding neighborhood, which we feel is critical. Real estate development projects are all hyper-local. This is a big project for Lakewood, but the residents on Marlowe and Belle will experience this project very closely. It'll be a lot different than the residents that don't live on those two streets. And so the Carnegie team has agreed to work with those residents and make sure that, for example, the site transitions into those residential structures in the correct way and also engages those community members to be a part of this project and welcome them in to the One Lakewood Place development. Also in your term sheet are some ideas about how the city and Carnegie team could explore areas of sustainability and resiliency. In particular, we've called out options maybe to work together on alternative transportation, creative ideas for green infrastructure, and also potentially renewable energy possibilities. The frank truth on this is we're not really sure what we can accomplish on this site, but what we've committed to is that we're going to explore together what could work. And by way of this opportunity, we should be looking at stuff like this. And so, again, specifically called out and prioritized in your term sheet. One piece that is not specifically called out in the term sheet that's in front of you is the construction jobs. We talked a little bit about the long-term stability, economic stability of the site through the creation of new housing units, office space, retail space. But there's a significant amount of construction that will happen on this 5.7 acres over the next 4 years. We're estimating that it's going to be well over 600 new construction jobs generated. George and Rustam are prepared to talk about that in a little bit more detail, but it's a lot of opportunity for labor to come into our community and build a very significant project. Two other important components I wanted to touch on tonight is your term sheet outlines what the proposed minimum schedule is. Once a development agreement is executed, it will be completed within 4 years. The Carnegie team does have a more aggressive schedule they're going to pursue, but at a minimum, we are saying the project will be completed within 4 years. In addition to that, in the term sheet, performance bonds will be secured to ensure the completion of the project, which is a very important point on the financing. So we've talked a lot tonight about what is included in the project. And I wanted to start with that because the public is expecting to invest in this project through the value of the land. And it is because we're investing that we're able to get the things that I talked to you tonight about, specifically Class A office space, new residential product, a community gathering space that anchors the Belle and Detroit corner, the adaptive reuse of the Curtis block, a parking garage that's funded by the developer, and land use and control through the process that we think is the best decision for the community at this corner. So the public investment is tied to those qualitative and quantitative benefits. There is a tangible financial return on this project. Again, estimated annual real estate and income taxes at $1.5 million. But just as important to that, maybe more important, is getting the land use correct and also honoring our development objectives that we set out this process from the beginning. I hope what I've gone over tonight, you can see the parallels between the development objectives that were established and the project that's in front of you. And that is a reason why the public is investing in this project. So briefly, I wanted to go over the proposed schedule for the project, and these will be ranges of dates and major milestones. So again, we'd be looking towards mid-May to gain approval of the term sheet, which would allow us to start the community planning and rezoning process in June. That'll likely take us between 6 and 10 months to complete, of which City Council is an integral part of that process. Starting in September of 2018 through February of 2019, sorry, that's a typo there, the abatement and demolition of the existing buildings on site would take place. Starting in March of 2019 through May of 2019, site prep will be conducted to prepare a development-ready site. And the summer of 2019, best case scenario, the new construction would begin. The target for opening the office, retail, Curtis block, community gathering space, and parking garage would be the winter of 2020. And then by the fall of 2021 or 2022, the residential piece would be completed. Especially in Northeast Ohio, where we really only get 8 to 10 months of good construction season, timing is critical for real estate development projects. And I wanted to put these milestones up in particular because they all matter. If you don't succeed at one of them, you're not able to move on to the next one. And so it's important for us to understand what that 4-year process could look like. And think back 4 years ago and how different the marketplace was even 4 years ago. Now fast forward 4 years and how much it could potentially change. It may not change. We're not sure. But 2000 2014 looked a little bit different than 2018 looks. 2022 is going to look different than 2018 looks. And so it's important just for us to understand how long these projects take to come out of the ground. What I wanted to end with tonight is that what we have in front of you is an agreed upon term sheet that we're seeking your review, and we look forward to questioning on and working towards. But what we're working towards next is what we really think our entire community wants to spend the most time on, which is the community engagement process of how this project's going to come out of the ground, how they are going to experience the community gathering space, what types of tenants are going to be in the Curtis block, what do the apartments look like, is there going to be for sale product? Those are the kinds of questions that we're hearing from our community members, and that will happen after the execution of the term sheet. So, Mr. Chair, that concludes my presentation for this evening. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you guys have.
Thanks. That obviously was quite a bit to digest, so I know that we'll have members with questions. I guess I want to, if we can, before we get too far down that path, I just want to make sure that we do set aside the time to address our schedule. So if we could do that just briefly, I'd like to open the floor to council members for a little bit of discussion as far as our meeting schedule goes. As Director Sylvester mentioned, there is a date, the 20th of May, I believe, as reflected in the PowerPoint, by which, we're targeting, I should say, which has implications for the project. So given that, we've got 3 weeks between now and then, 4 including our meeting tonight. What my intention is to hold our consideration of this agreement in special council meetings. So that way, basically, since a committee of the whole would be meeting in this room anyway, basically we have, the added assurance that it'll be recorded in our usual manner for council meetings and available by video to folks who may want to follow along at home. And basically that we have, our full ability to consider the issue in a special council meeting, as opposed to a committee of the whole, since effectively, we'd be meeting as such anyway. So I wanted to put that forward as a suggestion, and then also, obviously, the fact that we would be meeting Monday the 23rd, again Monday the 30th, and then Monday the 7th, and Monday the 14th, if we're still considering it at that point. Any comments or questions from council members on that proposed schedule?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Vice President Anderson.
Yeah, thank you. At a minimum, and maybe when we get closer to the 7th and 14th, if we find that there's a need to meet on a Wednesday or Thursday night, we can obviously put something in there. But I think front-loading this to make sure we keep on this every Monday until the second week of May is a good idea, and certainly has my support and my time. Monday nights are carved out, so let's make this happen. But I'm fully anticipating, should we need to spend another night together before the 20th, we have a couple of Wednesdays and Thursdays to go after as well between the 7th and the 14th.
Thanks. And I also make this request cognizant of the fact that community members have asked us to give as much advance notice as we can for our considerations of this important development for our downtown. So in that vein as well, this way we can signal, ahead clearly that this is what we're hoping to do. Any other additional questions or comments? Okay, if not, then we will set the schedule as such. Thank you again for working through that brief bit of housekeeping. I imagine that, as I said, we have a number of questions from council members, but I would, I guess, go ahead and open the floor generally. Director Sylvester, is there an order to questions that you think would be most efficient? Okay.
No.
Then we'll just go ahead and get started, I guess. Councilman O'Malley.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for all the hard work that I know went into getting us to this point. My understanding is that council's being asked to not only approve a term sheet, but to approve preemptively a development agreement that has not yet been negotiated and won't be before we vote on it. Is that true? And can you explain why we're being asked that?
Yeah, I can start us off on that, and then I might turn it over to Robin to add some value there too. The term sheet is a fairly detailed one. There are parts of the term sheet where you will see clauses that state, as referenced in the development and use agreement. And so I would say that those sections we expected to talk to you guys about throughout this term sheet process. But the development and use agreement is really the how we're going to execute the business terms that are in front of you now via this term sheet. So our approach to this was that we wanted to come and talk to you about what you're seeing in that term sheet. And if there are very specific concerns that you have related to how the site's going to be insured, how specifically the site will be transferred, not that it will transfer by this date, but show me the steps on how that's going to happen. That would be in the development and use agreement. But we worked hard to put a lot of detail in the term sheet to get us to this point, and we thought it was going to be enough detail to get us to being able to execute a development and use agreement. So Robin, I don't know if you would add anything to that.
Doing wrong.
You're on.
I am? Oh, okay, well.
Maybe not,
You'll
actually.
probably need a mic anyway.
Well, actually, you would, because I believe this is being recorded, is it not?
Yes.
I don't see any light at all.
That one's on. The one next to Rustum is
Okay,
on. Oh.
I apologize.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are different ways to proceed. We took the strategy from the get-go of trying to have a detailed term sheet that covered the material terms that would be reflected in a D&U agreement, with the understanding that we would have many council meetings about the term sheet, and that once approved, administration could move expeditiously to negotiate a development and use agreement that conform to it. And that enables us to also keep on track with the seasonality of the project, and avoid a situation where there's sort of multiple rounds of meetings on the same content. But the goal was to have a sufficiently detailed term sheet that the development and use agreement would be principally a ministerial task delegated to the administration. And it's a common approach on large development projects. It's not the only good one, but it is a common approach.
Would council be, I guess, would we also be authorizing the contracting authority for the abatement and demolition of the site?
Yes, as currently structured in the term sheet, the city is handling the abatement and demolition.
We would be,
Sorry, not to jump on your question, but I just wanted to clarify.
Authorizing the separate contract. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify that you were asking, is the demolition work specifically approved by this? And I'm not seeing that, so I just wanted to make sure we were clear on that.
So,
My apologies.
so would council be approving that bid, or would we be authorizing the administration to do that?
We would go through the process. We would issue a bid, so we formally go to bid for that, receive those bids back, the lowest and best who meets the qualifications, then we would bring that before council for enter into contract with that entity to do the demolition.
Okay.
And abatement.
Thank you. The potential return on the investment that you talked about, is that the city's share?
No. Real estate taxes are broken up. Primarily, they go to the schools. About 67% go to the schools. About 13% come to the city. The county, I believe, gets 16%. The library gets a share of that. The metro parks get a share of that. So the real estate taxes are actually broken up amongst our government partners. But the income taxes all come directly to the city.
I would appreciate a detailed analysis of the investment that the city's making and potential return risks. You know, I think that is paramount, the paramount element of what we're considering here. And you know, just a ballpark estimate isn't sufficient, but though I appreciate that, but I'd like a lot more detail.
Got it.
On that. I like what you said about the office space. I completely agree. You look at New York Life, for example, they themselves said that there was nothing we could have done to keep them here and their 350 jobs. We need Class A office space in this city, and that is probably that's one of the things I'm most excited about what's being proposed. And I think 100,000 square feet. I know that includes retail, but it seems like a pretty good number to me, although I'm not an expert. How long will the, I know that the Board of Control, I believe, authorized or approved contract to conduct an appraisal of that site recently, a couple weeks ago. How long will that appraisal take?
We will have the results back in early May.
So before we vote on this, probably?
Correct. It will be, yeah.
Okay. Are there any areas where the term sheet significantly differs from what we've seen proposed and what Carnegie outlined to us the last time they were here?
I might look to my partners at Carnegie. No. You know, we did set minimum development requirements, which have reduced what was proposed in that round two. But the reason for that is to establish true minimums. Understand that this team is going to execute the round two proposal that they put out in front of the community. Okay. So it's not just deliver the minimums that are in there. It's going to be, does the marketplace allow us to go above that, which our team believes that it does. And so that, what I would say, is the only major change, is that the development minimums are below what they originally proposed.
Okay. Can you talk about the element of performance bonds that are in the term sheet and the significance and importance of that?
Yeah.
Well, it's highly critical. It is the greatest protections for the city in terms of getting the ROI. Mm-hmm. It comes in a number of places. First, there are a number of conditions that have to be satisfied before the title to the property is conveyed. So that when the D&U agreement gets signed, title to the site does not get transferred. Only when Carnegie has met a number of criteria that are associated with demonstrating that the commercial portions of the project are moving forward, mm-hmm. including the requirement that construction financing have been identified and be ready to close. Only at that moment will title be conveyed. Okay. And when it is conveyed, the city will receive in return a performance and payment bond. So, it's getting actually the highest form of protection. This is actually superior to what many communities obtain in connection with major development projects, because it's, a huge surety company is standing behind mm-hmm. Carnegie's promise to perform. So you're not just getting a promise to perform from Carnegie at the point that you've transferred title, you're getting it from a global surety company. So that's a high degree of comfort, particularly with respect to the commercial portions of the projects that are required to be completed slightly ahead of the residential portion of the project. So that's something that should give you comfort that by the point that you have made the investment as a city, you will be assured of a greater degree of protection. There are some other important protections built into the term sheet as well, but unquestionably, the bond is the most important.
Okay.
Thanks.
I don't want to hog the time. I'll look, thank you again, and I'll look forward to continuing the conversation later.
Sounds good. Other council members, questions, comments at this time? Yes, Vice President Anderson.
Just to take the notion of performance bonds to the next step. Your mic, please. Thank you. Just taking the question in regards to performance bonds to the next step. Director Sylvester, I assume that part of the process for identifying Carnegie is the partner of choice was their past qualification and assurance of performance bonds on other projects that they've worked on in the region, in the state, across the United States. Is that true? Do they have a history of being able to identify, obtain, and utilize, if needed, this performance bond tool?
Yeah, I would, George, Rustin, I don't know if you guys can elaborate on specifically the performance bonds.
Certainly. When it comes to performance bonds, typically we're in a position where we're ready to start construction on the project and we've got a loan in place. And our lender historically would require that as a component of the project and as a assurance, collateral, if you will, of our ability to perform. But historically, we have done this throughout our 33 years of being in the business, and it's not unusual for us to provide that, and we're capable of doing that. And we've done that through every project that we're currently involved with, whether it's through the projects that we employ with the federal government or more on the private side, all the tenants that we often build to suit for.
Thank you. In addition, Mr. Chair, Director Sylvester, in regards to the demolition and hazardous materials abatement, the quote in here, development and pad ready. Can you unpack for us what development and pad ready actually means? Sounds like a term of art, pad ready, please.
It is a little bit. I'll also allow Rustin and George to weigh in. Development-ready site is preparing a site in a condition that allows the developer to start coming out of the ground with new construction. So it's, let's start with the beginning, the hazardous materials abatement of the entire property, followed by the demolition of all buildings on site, followed by engineered fill that would be put in place on where the buildings were to make sure that you're putting fill in the site that can take on a commercial property of this scale. And then site grading that typically happens to make sure that the site is graded in a way that can take on all components of the project. There is a significant grade change on this property from all the way back on the south edge of the property to Detroit, and so site grading is a big component of this. A big part of that will be the finished site grades that they need to build foundations for the mixed retail office building, for the parking structure, for any of the residential buildings that are in the south of the site. In addition to that, development ready also typically means that the city provide access to its utilities. In a greenfield, in a city that is not developed, sometimes that's a problem because you have to put in not only all gas and electric utilities, but sometimes you have to put in sewer and water infrastructure to get to the site. Because Lakewood was built out 100 years ago, we don't have that problem here. We have a lot of access points up and down Marlow, up and down Belle, and up and down Detroit. But that's also included in the development-ready condition that the city provide access to utilities so that the developer can connect to them. George, Rustin, I don't know if any other additions you would add to that.
I think you did a pretty good job on that, Bryce. Our concern obviously is getting a pad that we feel has mostly all the conditions addressed, that it's known. In this situation, obviously, we have the hospital that we're demolishing. There are basements that are involved with that. We will need to be addressing the issues associated with bringing in soil, bringing it to the appropriate grades. And, you know, as we progress in this project, which, you know, is really truly a metamorphosis, we'll be establishing what those grades are throughout the course of the project, but we'll try to estimate those to the best of our ability prior to, so that when we identify the specifications for development pad ready, hopefully it's a good guesstimate of where we need to be. But at the end of the day, it's all about making sure that we can stick a shovel in the ground and really start coming out of the ground vertically as quickly as possible.
Thank you for that. In regards to the $7 million that's been set aside specifically for the demo and abatement purposes, not to exceed $7 million is what the city anticipates putting forward as a result of the master agreement or the dissolution of LHA assets. That's the part that was attributed to this, not to exceed $7 million. So what if there's a situation where it does exceed $7 million? And conversely, what do we do if it comes in at anything under $7 million? What do we do with the remaining funds? What's possible? And what if we do go over that anticipated $7 million ceiling?
Yeah, so take the first part of the question. If the amount would go over $7 million, one thing that the city is evaluating to potentially protect us against that is something called cost cap insurance. We're currently talking to our insurers on what that would cost the city to protect us against unforeseen, typically environmental conditions on sites. So, which we don't think is going to be the case here because we have thorough environmental analysis conducted. But if there were issues that took us over that point, that insurance covers you above the $7 million limit. You know, we've begun to talk to demolition contractors and abatement contractors about the project and how much it would take to bring the buildings down. I would say the biggest question mark that we don't really know right now is the site work, both the engineered backfill that's likely going to need to go back to the site and also the regrading that's going to be required to deliver a development-ready site. But because we've got some abatement numbers back and demolition numbers back, we think that it's going to come in around $7 million. If the amount comes in less than $7 million, the idea would be to creatively repurpose it in the redevelopment project.
Thank you. And going back one question in regards to the 5 or 6 points that you ticked off concerning pad ready and what that really meant. I'm assuming that those 6 or 7 points are going to be fully sort of described and laid out in the development and use agreement, not necessarily needed to be fully described and laid out in the term sheet, but they will be to that amount of detail and specificity in the development and use agreement. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
I have a few questions in regards to the FAQs, but I think maybe I'll just hold those off, maybe talk to some folks independently. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sure. Thank you. Other council members, questions or comments? We'll go Councilman Litton and then Councilman Rader. Are you after that? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I noted, of course, a couple different places that the public plaza is mentioned, and want to understand, because it's interesting for me for a private development to have public space, and I'm curious, just maybe historically or in recent memory, or if you have any examples of public spaces on private spaces that would help me to maybe feel more comfortable about knowing that this will work. You know, because I guess a fear I would have would be that, say, the private yoga class gets really popular and fills up the plaza every day, and there's a temptation to just do that and not allow for the public use. It's a terrible example, but anyway, I guess it could get that popular. But at any rate, help me with understanding that public versus private space usage.
Yeah, I'll kick us off, and then I'll turn it over to George and Rustam to talk about how they intend to use it. But as we thought about the programming here, the Carnegie team benefits greatly from it being activated on a regular basis. And so Councilman Lynn, I don't have a site off the top of my head that is privately held but publicly used, but they are in urban centers all over the world. There's no doubt about that. And in my opinion, I think the regular citizen does not respond necessarily to spaces being public or private. They respond to spaces being beautiful. They respond to spaces being welcoming. And those are two elements that the private developer can control and maintain for the long term. So for me, I think it's a lot more about the intent of design and programming from the onset than about land control. And that is a common approach in cities all over the place. If it was helpful, I'd be happy to pull a couple that come maybe that are around the region.
Sure.
And also some others too, if you think that would be helpful.
And also, thank you. That would be great. And then also, you know, will the space, and maybe this is getting too far into the weeds, but, you know, no one who is perhaps not using any of the businesses that are around there would be excluded from using the space or anything of that nature. I assume by calling it a public space that it is truly that.
Yeah. Yes, that is the intent. And I would turn it over to George and Rustam maybe to add intent of programming. And
Well, you know, and I think it's important to note that, you know, we're evolving and analyzing exactly what this space should be.
Sure.
We want to sit down and talk to you about what you envision. I know that there are placeholders that we've talked about, so many dates during the year that are specifically earmarked for functions that the city would like to have, community gatherings of various sorts. The management of the space itself overall is one that I think is going to be an integrated approach so that you can be assured that we're getting the maximum use and vitality out of it, which is an essential component to us as well, because it truly is an amenity. It's an amenity not only to the community and to the city itself, but also to the project. And we look forward to having the opportunity to sell that as part of the project to our tenants so that they can be in a position where they know that they can go out, they can use it. Maybe a portion of it is going to be for outdoor dining that we earmark for some of the cafes or the restaurants that might be there. There might be community gathering areas or, you know, stages and so forth that could be earmarked for the tree lighting ceremonies and the kinds of things that the city has customarily been doing and would like to do that maybe was done out in the public streets. It could be done as part of this space as well. And we expect wholeheartedly that there'll be some kind of a program in place that's identified in the DUA that will set forth these types of criteria and management policies that will give us the benefit, I think, that everybody can enjoy.
Thank you. One other thing.
Sure.
I appreciate the public plaza piece is in here, of course. I also appreciate that there's a note about the historical significance of the site to our community. I don't know that it needs to be fleshed out any further in this agreement, but I do think that an equally important public conversation to the ones that we plan on having here is one about how we, you know, officially decommission that space as a place where people have received health care for over 100 years, and how we honor that space, how we allow our community to, you know, say goodbye to that space and that use. And to whatever extent I can be helpful, I'm happy to help with, you know, helping convene that conversation separately, together with this one, or what have you, just because I think it's important that we do this right. And we have a timeline that you've shown us that also tells us, you know, the building's going to go away at some point, and so we need to be prepared for that. We need to do this right. And I would encourage our community to also help in figuring that part out, as well as the, you know, we need to figure out how to honor our past as well as, you know, work on our future here. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but I'd be happy to help.
no, we would very much appreciate the help, Councilman. You know, we've thought through a couple of creative things on our own, but our expectation there is that we get help from the community to help us define what that is. So, you know, I will take you up on your offer of help because we're going to need it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks. Councilman Rader.
Thank you. Yeah, off the public space portion of this, because I think it was sort of mentioned in the beginning that it might be considered, that this could be maintained by the city and stay public space. And I know that's something that's kind of off the table. And I understand that it's certainly in the interest of everybody, even Carnegie Development, everybody concerned that this is is treated as public space. Now, what kind of assurances do we have, or what kind of, I guess, guarantees or language, or what kind of control do we have keeping it public space? Because I could see in the future that maybe the owner of the land, maybe it'll be Carnegie in the future, would have a different use for it, maybe more, office space, maybe something else, another structure there, being the owner of the land. Them being the owner of the land, what does the city then, how do we control it, or how do we, what process do we use as a city to keep it in public space if it's not, owned by the city? So.
That's a great question, Councilman. I'm going to look to Robin on this before I respond, but I don't believe there is a control in there specifically called out to require that it stays public space, but I will say that is what we expect. And I would also turn to the Carnegie team that based on the design that they've come up with, I won't put words in your mouth, but I think that's what you guys expect as well. So, Robin, I don't know if there's
Before you do that, just let me interject one point. Having it as public space was considered. That option was explored. And Robin, and I think George and Rustin, if you could explain it, becomes very complicated for a whole bunch of reasons that I think you can explain. So to say that it's off the table, it was on the table previously. We worked hard to understand how it could work, and frankly didn't think it was in the long-term best interest of the citizens of Lakewood.
Yeah, so what I would say is, although the mechanics of how we can address that, we will work on in the development and use agreement, there are good options available to us that will ensure the continued commitment to at least half of an acre being devoted to sort of the shared public use, which is the commitment that is made. So it could mean that 20 years from now, the space would look different, but there still has to be a dedicated minimum. The development and use agreement will be a recorded instrument that will be recorded in the real property records. So that's a place that we can continue that commitment. We could do a separate additional restrictive covenant. There's a number of tools. They all, as long as they're recorded in the real property records, they run with the land and would govern relationships with future owners of the property.
That answers my question.
And we don't want to have it be so restrictive that in the future there's not the ability to reconceive and reconceptualize, because that's an important part of this project being successful long term, is to give Carnegie the flexibility it needs to reconceive and reconceptualize, if some patio isn't working quite right. But the core basics, the basic structure of the commitment to the community has to remain in place. And the development and use agreement will definitely serve that purpose.
Okay, thank you. Another question real quick. We referred, I think, point 15 in the term sheet, referring to trade jobs. That's union trade jobs, right? Is that what that refers to? Okay, union, good.
I think the trade reference there is just construction trades generally,
Yes,
right?
that's correct.
But yeah, union job.
Okay. One second. So I think it was said in the beginning, sitting in on some of the meetings of 2017, that Carnegie would be a partner in this project for years to come. So do you envision the city or Carnegie being owners of this property, or is there anything in the language that I might have missed in the terms, or maybe it'll be fleshed out in the agreement that you'll continue ownership for some period of time or some into the foreseeable future?
Yeah, great question. I would turn it over to Carnegie to weigh in on expectations there.
Well, the philosophy, first and foremost, and core objective of everything we do at Carnegie is to hold on to the property, to develop it, to operate it, to maintain it. That's really the way we have conducted ourselves throughout our history. We have a very, very small, very minute percentage that may have ultimately left the portfolio, but they were for reasons that, we're in some instances, in the best interest of the company, but generally speaking, we do hold on to all of our properties. We're very proud of them. We want to stand by the commitments and the intent and the design and the various obligations that we're going to be setting forth here for you today, and we're very proud of doing that. We like to stand on our record, and we've done so historically with every project. That's one of the reasons why we have so much repeat business.
Good.
And there is also in the term sheet and contemplated to be in the development and use agreement, there are restrictions on Carnegie's ability to transfer any major component of the project until 3 years after achieving substantial completion. So the goal is to ensure that, the project will have been completed in the way that this partnership envisions for a substantial period of time before you could end up with a different owner owning some piece or part of it.
Good. So, yeah, good. So that means they'd be able to bring in tenants and things would be up and running before there'd be any sort of talk about. But it sounds to be, and thank you for addressing that. I really appreciate it. One last question, if I may. Something that I mentioned to the administration before, and something I just need to get out and we need to sort of talk about is it's been mentioned in the media that Ed Fitzgerald has participated in this project, and he is was a contractor, had contracted with Carnegie in this. I'd like to know the specific time frame, if you could tell us, when he worked for this project, and if he has any sort of relationship with Carnegie during the times that he was mayor, and maybe even when he was on council, and that time period was 1999 to 2011. Is that something you're prepared to answer?
Yes.
Great.
No affiliation with Carnegie, not to my knowledge,
Okay.
during the time that he was associated with the city in a council or in mayoral capacity. He has acted in the last 2 years, I think it is, or 3 years, in a consulting capacity on land acquisition in connection with some projects that we were pursuing. But outside of that, his involvement here on this particular project was purely in an advisory capacity as an advocate, in my opinion, of the city, trying to promote, establishing certain tax bases that would be, he thought, important. And we frankly picked his mind because we felt he had some intimate knowledge about what maybe some of the nuances and some of the issues associated with the city were. So to that extent, we did rely on some of the information that he provided. But other than that, no further involvement.
So you don't foresee there being any conflict of interest in the mayor administration, there being no conflict of interest between Ed Fitzgerald and this project and being the mayor and kind of being somebody who was part of the discussion of closing the hospital in the first place? I just want to get it out in the open. And
No, I do not.
Okay.
From our perspective, whatever decisions were associated with the hospital were well after or well before any involvement or inquiry by us to ask about what the concerns of the city were. As again, this was in response to our need to adequately respond to the RFP. So,
Okay.
no, I don't.
thank you very much.
Sure.
And I might just add, actually, for additional perspective from the Citizen Advisory Panel, having had a seat at that process, that my recollection is that I think Mr. Fitzgerald might have attended one meeting with the advisory panel, possibly a second, but I think there was just the one that I remember, and I only remember him making, I think, one comment in the course of that meeting, and it was with respect to making sure that the city, through involvement with Carnegie, would be able to achieve the union, union job objectives that certainly a lot of us would value, and that the city had, I think, tangentially expressed a desire for through the overall job creation objective of the project. But from the perspective of a panel member, the role wasn't significant. I know that Councilwoman George has a question or two. I also, if we can, would like to take a little bit of public comment at the end of this meeting. I will note as well for the public that there will be additional opportunities to comment on this item, not only with respect to our coming meetings in the coming weeks, But of course, additionally, with respect to our city council meeting here this evening, there's the ability to sign up to comment on this as a docket item, as it appears on our docket. And then there is also public comment that's taken at the end of the regular council meeting. So both sign-up sheets are over there for those opportunities. We'll pass it off to Councilwoman George. And then, Councilwoman George, how many, I know that you've probably got a ton, do you want to?
Yeah, I can limit my questions, and then we can ask some more during the next committee or council meeting.
Thank you. I would
I'll
appreciate
be mindful of
your consideration
public
on that.
comment time. But, thank you, Director Sylvester and Carnegie for being here and putting this together. As Councilman O'Malley indicated, I do have quite a few questions, but we can go through a couple here tonight. I do want to be mindful that people do want to speak, and I want to hear what people have to say and their thoughts and their opinions. So I'm glad we have some people signed up to speak this evening. Just to continue on Councilman Rader's line of questioning regarding former Mayor Ed Fitzgerald. So it appears that we understand there's no conflict of interest with him being the former mayor and now being involved with Carnegie. But I'd like a better understanding of how he got involved with Carnegie, his current role with Carnegie, and any sort of future role, as well as, what sort of financial gains, if you will, from being a consultant and then, it going to Carnegie. So if I don't know if it's Director Sylvester or if a representative from Carnegie wants to speak to that, but I need a better understanding of that, and I think a lot of the public has the same concerns that I do. So hopefully we can flush some of that out here.
Thanks.
Yeah, we turn it over to George.
Councilman George, I'm not sure I answered the question adequately, but I'll try to do it again. He was acting as a consultant in the capacity of offering us information about what the concerns were, what his perceived concerns were of the city and what the needs of the city were. He was always advising us on the importance of bringing jobs to the city of Lakewood and how we could potentially do that, all in connection with our effort to respond to this RFP. Currently, he's not in any advisory capacity for this project, although he has been involved with bringing potential prospects, representing them to us. That has nothing to do with us. There's an interest right now with a boutique hotel, and he has brought that particular prospect to the table, and we've had discussions about how that could potentially be a part of this project. But outside of that, his involvement with Carnegie, as I mentioned, has been only in the last 3 years, and it has been on other projects, mostly in his land acquisition efforts to help us find sites for other tenants and other projects. And so I don't know if that adequately answers your question or not. But
Yeah, thank you. So just so I understand, he was involved in the past, but currently he is not a consultant for Carnegie.
oh, he's consulting on other projects, but not on this one here.
But not on this one here.
That's correct.
Although he is bringing some development opportunities
Sure.
to you
Yep,
to review.
absolutely, yes.
Okay. And does he stand to gain financially from this?
We only, and as we do with every consultant, he charges a fee and we pay him accordingly, and it's not anything that is unique to him or to any other consultant that we end up employing for whatever reason.
Okay. Thank you for that. Okay, thank you.
The only thing I would add, Councilwoman George, is what Ed Fitzgerald's role is professionally today. I mean, he does operate a real estate advisory group, or he's part of one. So in his professional capacity, that is his role related to this project.
Okay. Yeah, I will, if I have more questions on that component, I will ask those as needed. But thank you for the explanation.
Thanks. Do you have one more quick one for tonight, or do we want to pick up at
do,
next time?
Okay. I guess the other one, and maybe for time's sake again, I do want to go back to the public space component. That's really an important aspect of this development to me. I know I had some initial conversations. I was hoping actually the public space component could actually remain an actual public space and not part, not owned by any development, what have you, because, you know, looking into the future, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years from now, when Carnegie's no longer involved, what sort of guarantee would we have that this space is going to remain public? I think it's a great asset, but I'm really pretty steadfast on that portion remaining public, with Carnegie, you know, managing it, if you will, beautifying the site, not to put additional burden on our Public Works Department. That's a pretty important component. So, you know, I don't know, Director Sylvester, if you want to take it from there, but I think that's something we really need to negotiate in the term sheet.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the input there. Here's what I will ask from your group. Take who owns the land off the table and tell us what you want to execute. So what does it mean to you when you say you want the space to be public? Unpack that more for us. So specifically, what does that mean? Does that mean that any member of the community can go and sit down at seating that's in that space? Can they walk up and play with the splash pad? Can they, what specifically is it about it being public that you want? Because I think we can work very hard with our partners to ensure that the long-term execution of that space remains that way. So what I could use from you guys is specifics on how you see that space being used.
Well,
Thanks.
if I may add to that and expound on what Robin had already discussed, there will be mechanisms in place that virtually ensure in perpetuity that that space would remain quote-unquote public. And of course, as Bryce indicated, we'll need to define exactly what you perceive that to be, and we want to work with you. And we think our interests are aligned in that regard, and that's one of the components that we suggested, as a matter of fact, as a part of this project. And we see that being something that is going to remain that way in perpetuity.
Thanks.
It is contemplated that things like maintenance standards and accessibility, utilization of the space, those would be part of the development and use agreement, which is going to be recorded against the property, has a binding contractual obligation on the property owner, not specific to Carnegie. It's not it is whoever owns the property has that obligation to fulfill that. And there are remedies that will be associated with a default. So the goal is to put the city operationally in the same position as if ownership existed, but fulfill Carnegie's need for control and connection with the financeability of the property. It's not that it's unheard of to have bifurcated ownership, but it is highly complex and difficult for a developer to find financing where the city retains ownership of the property, and yet the funds to improve the space are being provided under a loan being provided by a commercial lender. And it's a very unwieldy structure that Carnegie demonstrated would be highly problematic, given the integrated, their contemplated design here that shows this as being the primary pathways in and out of all of the retail space, the office space, that it would be difficult for them to finance the very significant construction costs associated with that public space without the ownership. So we looked at what was most important was protecting the city's interests, and we think we have a mechanism that will enable that.
Thanks. I'm terribly sorry to interrupt, but in the interest of time, I'm going to have to, I think we have one more question from Councilman Bullock, and then, as promised, we'll get to a little bit of public comment, and then we'll adjourn, and then we'll roll into our regular council meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Carnegie and to Robin Minter Smyers, our attorney, and the administration. This is a great day. We've begun a good discussion that will continue. Quickly, I want to say we've talked a little bit about risk and the potential downside of risk, but risk also is opportunity, right? Risk could be caution or opportunity. And so, to use a timely analogy from basketball, we hope for better later this week from the Cavs. We could ask about a three-point shot. How many three-point shots miss versus actually make it through the rim? But a better question would be, wouldn't you like a wide-open three-point shot with a game on the line in the playoffs? That's what we've got for our city right now. And in the 80s, we weren't in the playoffs. The context of growth in the housing market, growth in the business and commercial market, and the interest and the vibrancy in Lakewood has just quintupled in the last 10 years. And that's fantastic, because if we put this same redevelopment project in a time machine and went backwards in time, we probably wouldn't get this proposal. If we went forward in time, we don't know what we'd get. So I view this as a very great opportunity that we can and will and want to make work so that it can do for our city the job it's supposed to do, which is to revitalize the downtown and to grow the tax base. So I hope my colleagues will join me, and we're going to do our very best to hold to that timeline. So the Las Vegas marketing, and one day hopefully that's in Cleveland, at the Global Trade Center in Cleveland, that marketing convention can be hit with what you need in hand to execute good tenant agreements. Couple of quick criteria I'd like to see from the term sheet. I think most we're on track for, and a couple I want to have continued discussion for. First is we need to make sure we're good neighbors during construction and during operation. I think planning directors addressed that to a significant degree in the design and the parking in particular. But that's certainly an important criteria. The Curtis Block Historic Preservation, that's a very big deal. I think we're on track with that one. The two where I think we could, either we need more work or I need to spend a little time getting more specific understanding, would be the elements of the project related to sustainability. I prefer these are not afterthoughts. So it's one thing to have stormwater management, and that's great, but let's not miss our opportunity to be a little bit more ambitious with some energy management, some energy efficiency, and all the rest. And the question of how that's financed is a fair one. I don't come with that answer, but I know that if we wait 10 years and the project is built and try to go backwards and add, it's going to be expensive and more expensive and less impactful. So now's the time for us to seize the opportunity. And then the final one is the public use of the plaza issue that a number of colleagues have mentioned. I understand more clearly after Attorney Mr. Smyers just talked, it's a business structure that we're trying to establish that the rest of the deal does what's needed for financing. I also know that the planning director's view is that often operation and maintenance and programming is best done, or it tends to get more TLC from private side management. So those are all legitimate things, but I do think we need to talk through permitting and scheduling. Right now, the agreement talks about the city having access, but what about the public? That's different, I think. The public through the city is fine, but can I go and have a protest for peace, or rah-rah for Donald Trump's orange hair, or something like that? Is that envisioned, or is that envisioned as being not a part of that space? That's important to talk through. and also really the capital build. I had a conversation with some of my colleagues in the mayor, I think 4 or 5 months ago. The scale of ambition that we envision here and the quality and function of design all have a lot of elements. So I've got a vision that I think I kind of sketched out to Bryce once, very European market, high-quality cobblestones, Victorian partial cover over the top. I mean, beautiful. We should go A double plus, okay? And I don't know who's going to pay for it, but maybe the city, if the city's, maybe the city would have skin in the game on this kind of thing if the vision that I, am trying to import from London and the south of France would come off here. But let's talk about it before we, we said it. And there's a difference between a shopping plaza and a public park. There's a difference between a shopping plaza and a public space. And I hear and I get that we need to get your needs met as developers as part of this deal. I think there could be alternatives to also get the public need met. But there's a vision question here. I don't know if everything I just said is fully on the same page with the discussions that have already happened. So to me, that's worth spending a little time on, further time, whatever the mechanism may be that we achieve that through contracts or use agreements or leases or what have you. But in my view, if the city were, if we were to say, all right, you're going to do an A-grade build, if the city added some more funds, it would be a double plus build, let's do it. Because if you design and build at this level, we're probably not going to retrofit anytime soon and build it at that other higher level. So we got to agree what we're aiming for now, I think, if we're going to get there.
Certainly.
Thanks. That wasn't really fast, so I apologize to the chair.
Thanks. So more to come on those topics for sure. As promised, I want to get in a little bit of public comment now, if we can. I see that there are 2 folks who are signed up to speak on this docket item this evening, which is great. If you would like to speak now in addition to that, or if there's anyone who didn't sign up who wants to speak now, feel free to avail yourself of the podium. Not seeing anybody? Okay, that's perfectly fine too. We'll look forward to your comments on the docket item itself when we come back. Oh, I'm sorry. I was offering if you are not signed up to speak and you would like to speak now as opposed to speaking later on the docket item when we call it for council, you can do that. But if you'd like to speak now, you can. Okay, okay. Let's do that then.
Sorry, I have 2 small children, so I can't
problem.
be here through the end.
Yeah.
I'm Colin Weaver, so I'm on the list. Anyways, I think a lot of people have raised the public space and use, and I'll just start by one to point to from previous experience. I've seen work really well, a public-private partnership. If people look at Brooklyn Bridge Park in New York City, actually is a really fantastic use of public land and private development and funding and having condo fees pay for upkeep. And it is complicated, but it was actually a really fantastic model to look at, to research more. But I actually wanted to ask mainly about, in that public space, it says in here there needs to be no less than half an acre. I mean, all the documents previous from the developers, the square footage was 35,000 square feet, which is 0.8 of an acre. So it's a 38% reduction. And I realize it's just saying that's the minimum. But why, I'm curious, what was the reason for having a 38% reduction in the public space? I guess, yeah, just start there.
Sure. Director Sylvester, do you want to kick off the discussion?
Yeah, and then I'll turn it over to George and Rustin too to add to that. 2 main factors was, one, setting a minimum to deliver, trying to understand that the buildings will likely move a little bit throughout the site depending on end uses, tenants that come on site, how the Curtis block is used, what type of retail is landed, And the Carnegie team brought up some good points about use of space for things like outdoor dining. So if you had a restaurant space that wanted a large outdoor dining patio, does that encroach on the public space, or is that a part of the private development? So we worked through just some of those practical examples to get to that minimum. But I would say in the same breath that the minimum development requirements for office, retail, residential, the developer is still looking at 38,000 feet for that space. We just had to set a floor that they couldn't go under. George, Rustam, I don't know if you would add anything to that.
Yeah, and I think Bryce hit the first one with, the uses on that first floor retail. We'll need some space outside for possible dining, but the other big one was that we were expressed by the city that ABR and Planning Commission may dictate additional setback requirements for the side yards. So we didn't want to put ourselves in a situation where trying to comply with the requirements from the governing bodies in the city put us in default of the agreement that we've signed. So that was really it.
But the expectation is still
we want to maximize that space as much as possible.
Yeah, and that's great. And I think everybody obviously here does, but given that it's public quote unquote space, I just would say that like this is an area where it's obviously very important to everybody that we try to say like set the minimums maybe closer to what was been sort of talked about for the past year or plus in part of these things, which is having it be at roughly 3/4 of an acre, give or take, and having that be sort of the benchmark. And I do want more outdoor patio seating at restaurants, so I'm all in favor of that for sure. And lastly, just if we can just not have this thing look like Crocker Park, that would be really great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I definitely appreciate those comments. So thank you again for signing up to speak. That brings us to the end of our conversation this evening, but of course, as we discussed, stay tuned. Please feel free to join us here in our City Council auditorium next Monday, April 23rd at 6 p.m. We're looking at for a start time, so we'll pick it up there. Again, thank you so much, all of you, Mr. Papandreas, Mr. Corey, and Ms. Minter-Smyers, as well as everyone from the audience for joining us here this evening for our conversation. Move to adjourn Committee of the Whole. Second. Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion on the motion to adjourn Committee of the Whole? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? That motion passes.